I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. For Moscow, multilateralism has become the art of survival. As Russia's isolation deepens in the West, it's clinging ever tighter to the East. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO for short, has quietly become its favorite stage. Moscow says the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is about mutual security and shared prosperity. But scratch beneath the summit speeches and you'll find something far more self-serving. Russia's attempt to turn a regional club into a geopolitical lifeline. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Moscow is once more in the thick of it when it comes to its attempts to build a new international trade empire in Asia. This time, the Russian efforts concern the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, whose summit Moscow is hosting as it has taken over the organization's rotational presidency. The summit and the SCO are economy-focused endeavors. As Western sanctions have crippled any hopes Russia may have had for continued lucrative trade with the West, Moscow has turned to its Asian partners, China in particular. The latest SCO summit will undoubtedly be focused on China and Russia developing their trade relations even further. In the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, China has become Russia's most important trade partner. The two countries are in very close contact when it comes to matters of the economy, and it was no different ahead of this SCO summit.
China is willing to conduct in-depth exchanges with Russia on the macroeconomic situation and policies of both countries, so as to promote and support each other's development and rejuvenation.
Russia has taken over the presidency from China, who had organized a recent summit in Tianjin 3 months ago. This summit drew attention from all over the world, as it was one of the most poignant displays of the Sino-Russian alliance in the face of both Western sanctions and the new American tariff policy. Given the current tensions between the West and both China and Russia, the Moscow summit is not expected to be in the spotlight any less.
And now it's time to zone in on the East-splaining portion of our show. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is one of the many economic formats which define trade in Asia. As successor to the so-called Shanghai Five, it is the world's largest regional organization by population and geography.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, more commonly known as the SCO, was formed in 2001 after the Shanghai Five, Russia, China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, met for a summit which included Uzbekistan and formed the new entity. Following that meeting, the SCO grew in scope to also encompass India and Pakistan in 2017. Iran later joined in 2023, and Belarus became an SCO member in 2024, bringing the total number of members to 10. The SCO is a geopolitical entity that is predominantly focused on the economic sphere of affairs between its members, though it also serves different purposes related to cultural exchange and counter-terrorist operations. Many of its members, such as Russia, China and India, are also part of BRICS, which has put the SCO under the umbrella of organizations opposed to what is seen as the Western-led world order. For heavily sanctioned countries such as Russia itself, Iran or Belarus, it is an avenue to boost trade relations and search for ways to supplement losses exacted by Western sanctions. For economic powerhouses like China, it is regarded as a way to expand political influence and position themselves as a regional or even global player.
And now it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. Let's begin. Originally founded in 2001 to promote regional security and cooperation across Eurasia, the SCO today has 8 full members, including China, India and Pakistan, with more joining as dialogue partners and observers. And now, in 2025, it's starting to look like the scaffolding for a new world order, at least in Russia's eyes. Because for Moscow, the SCO is about leverage. After 3 years of war in Ukraine, crippling Western sanctions and diplomatic isolation, the Kremlin needs alternative economic channels, diplomatic validation and above all partners who won't lecture it about human rights or war crimes. The SCO fits that bill perfectly. At every summit, Russia's diplomats preach the language of multipolarity, that the world is no longer defined by Washington, Brussels or NATO. But that word, multipolarity, means something very different depending on who's actually using it. For the Kremlin, it's code for anti-Western pluralism, a world where Moscow can carve out influence, trade and legitimacy without ever facing accountability. The SCO offers exactly that illusion of acceptance, a geopolitical mirror in which Russia can still see itself as a great power. But beneath the rhetoric, Moscow's goals are much more pragmatic. First, there is economic survival. Sanctions have throttled Russia's access to Western markets and technology. So, it's turning to the SCO as a trade corridor, a bridge between the Russian economy and Asia's manufacturing giants. China, India, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have all seen surges in bilateral trade with Russia since 2022, much of it facilitated through SCO-linked initiatives. Officially, this is about regional connectivity, but in reality, it's about sanctions evasion, rerouting goods, payments and raw materials through friendlier channels. Moscow calls it parallel imports, Washington calls it smuggling. Either way, it's keeping Russia's war machine supplied and its economy on life support. Secondly, there is the security theater. The SCO began as a counter-terrorism forum, you see. Russia now wants to turn it into something closer to a security alliance. Not quite NATO, but an Eastern counterpart that legitimizes Moscow's militarized view of stability. Joint military drills between SCO members, branded as anti-terrorism exercises, have become more frequent. They showcase Russian weaponry, project its regional influence, and send a subtle message to the West. Russia may be weakened, but it isn't alone. In the long term, the Kremlin hopes to use the SCO to build a coordinated front against Western security initiatives in Eurasia, like NATO's growing partnerships with Japan and South Korea. In the end, it's an issue of diplomatic legitimacy. When Vladimir Putin attends SCO summits, he's photographed alongside presidents and prime ministers. The optics do actually matter. For domestic audiences, it's proof that Russia isn't isolated. And for global ones, it's an assertion that the non-Western world has alternatives. And as long as the SCO gives it that illusion, Moscow will keep calling it a partnership of equals. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Olga Zadorozhna, Professor of Economics at the Koźmiński University. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So when you're looking at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, can you see any way in which it could evolve that could prove to be a major challenge to the West?
Well, to answer your question in a short way, I don't think so. To give you a more extended answer, I would say that currently we see how this organization is proving not very sustainable and not very viable to Russia. Because of economic reasons mostly, and especially due to the latest US sanctions, we see that both India and China are using their consumption of Russian oil, substituting it with the Saudi oil, and hence the SCO as the platform to sustain economic influence of Russia and to sustain its economy is not really viable in the long term. Still, Russia and India are choosing their own economic interests, and they don't want to cut all ties with the US markets and also the European markets because of the sanctions, just to help Russia economically.
Now, when looking at the situation we're talking about, it might actually seem familiar because we do often discuss the BRICS in a similar way. We often look upon BRICS as an organization that has a tremendous potential, and yet there are diverging economic and political interests between its members. The organization is massive, but also doesn't really have a coherent decision-making process, so it's not quite as closely knit as either the European Union or NATO. So it's not a military alliance, it's not an economic union. And yet, one obviously has to look at some of the details there. Now, how would you say the SCO differs from the BRICS instead of what it sets out to achieve and what it can achieve in the current geopolitical climate?
Well, I should start outlining briefly the history of SCO to give you the answer. It was established back in 2001 by Russia and China, and Russia was the main founding member. And as the time passed, it included more and more members, and now the countries joining the SCO are primarily the countries with dictatorial regimes or the semi-dictatorial regimes. And these include China, India, Pakistan, Iran, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and some other Central Asian states. And so for Russia, the main interest now in this organization is the diplomatic interest, but also obviously the economic interest. And to compare it with BRICS, I would say that the SCO is more important for Russia as of now, because it depends on Chinese and Indian markets for the oil revenues, and it depends on the Central Asian markets for the circumvention of sanctions, of Western sanctions, because as we know from analytical reports and academic papers and media reports, the majority of the technology from the Western world, it reaches Russia through either Chinese market or a Central Asian market. So the SCO is more important for the economy of Russia than the countries that are included in BRICS. And the second reason why the SCO is so important for Russia is diplomatic. It's important for Putin to be able to shake hands with the leaders of the SCO, with the presidency of China, with the President Modi of India, because it displays the might of Russia, the remnants of it on international arena. Russia is not invited to other organizations. Putin himself, he is not welcome neither in G7 summits or other international platforms that include Western countries. And so these SCO or SCO summits, they are the only platforms where he can actually meet international leader. And this picture, these videos from those summits, they are massively exploited by the propaganda machine in Russia to show this.
So essentially being used to show Putin's economic and political muscle flexing. But you've mentioned Central Asia. Now, this is something quite interesting, really, because this is an aspect that's not quite as present in the BRICS. But here we actually have a couple of these countries being essentially founding members, more of them joining in at a later stage. And yet they also have their own interests, right? Central Asia, with its resources, with the middle corridor, is about to become a very important part of the world, and they know it. They recently met with Donald Trump. They want to have good relationships with China, but also with the European Union, because if they want to take full advantage of the middle corridor, well, they need to do that. Russia also lays claim to influence there, because these countries used to be a part of the Soviet Union. Doesn't the case of Central Asia demonstrate that ultimately the SCO is a gathering of countries that may agree on certain things, but in the end they do also have their own interests, economic, political, which will override this, willingness to appear part of this great SCO international family? Because, I mean, what counts after all is said and done, is what these countries actually are able to get out of it for themselves, for their own governments and their own people.
Definitely, they all have their own agenda, and they put their own interest above all. They don't want to rescue Russian economy for the sake of this SCO participation. Instead, they value their connections to the US and the European Union more. And the case that you mentioned, when the leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia went to the US to sign the peace agreement, that's exactly that. This is the sign that the influence of Russia over those countries is diminishing. And they value their connection to the Western world, and they are not ready to support Russia and Putin until the very last day of Russia's existence.
So actually, that's yet another example, because we had the 5+1 meeting of leaders of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, but also, as you've mentioned, Azerbaijan and Armenia, and they are also part of this geopolitical puzzle. And recently, The SCO has actually been making various deals promoting the Middle Corridor. Isn't that kind of interesting? Because for Russia, the Middle Corridor isn't exactly a great deal, because it circumvents the transfer of goods through the Russian territory altogether. Doesn't this show that Russia has ultimately a limited influence on what is actually decided within the SCO itself?
Yes, of course. And so I started telling you the history of SCO, and yes, it started as the main platform of Russia and partly China to discuss the economic diplomatic ties and things. But currently, China plays the main role there, and Russia's role is overshadowed by the role of China. And of course, the Russian propaganda machine tries to display and portray Putin as the main participant either in the summits or just overall as Russia as the main player in this SCO. But no longer this is the case. China now is the leader of this organization. And so those Central Asian countries that you were mentioning, they are more interested in the closer ties with China rather than Russia. And those countries, I think they benefit as well from Russia being weakened economically and financially. And here we see that this institution, this SCO organization, it's not the same as the Western organizations like the NATO alliance or the European Union, obviously, because of the weak institutional baseline of this SCO organization. And they all have their own interests and they're all playing their own cards.
Well, the big question, which was actually posed by the author of one of the articles that was published on the subject recently, is the West sleeping on the SCO? Because, of course, this organization could be dismissed as a club of authoritarians and so on. And yet, by simply standing on the sidelines, not engaging, isn't the West actually missing out? With some countries there, we might actually have some business to do with, like India is one example, Central Asia, obviously. Would you say the West needs some sort of selective engagement with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization so as not to be left behind when it comes to crucial developments in this part of the world?
I mean, of course, the ties should be established and the conversation should be ongoing with all of the countries that are part of this SCO, except for Russia, obviously, for the obvious reasons. But the direct engagement, like the participation as members in this clearly anti-Western club, I don't think these would go really well. Definitely, the one-on-one conversations, the diplomatic efforts should be established with those countries, but not necessarily as participating members in SCO.
Olga Zadorozhna was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and, of course, for sharing your insight into the subject.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a major overhaul to the country's scandal-ridden energy sector. The president has signed a gas deal with Greece to help alleviate Ukraine's ongoing energy problems.
In a bid to overcome the ongoing crisis, Zelensky has signed an agreement to import US-supplied liquefied natural gas from Greece starting this December. The deal will be in power until March 2026. The aim is to help alleviate Ukraine's energy shortage during the coming winter, as this is the most difficult season for Ukrainians since the start of the Russian invasion. The Ukrainian leader also used the opportunity to address the current corruption scandal plaguing the Ukrainian energy sector. Zelensky intends to replace the heads of Ukraine's major state-owned energy companies, such as Energoatom. It is unclear whether this move will satisfy Kiev's Western partners and the Ukrainian public. The scandal has had a personal aspect in relation to Zelensky, as Timur Mindik, one of the president's former business partners, found himself at its center.
The Russian occupation forces in the Luhansk region have launched a forced call-up of reservists. This is the first time that Russia has carried out forced large-scale mobilization in the occupied Donetsk and Luhansk regions since 2022.
As Russia is making slow progress across eastern Ukraine at the cost of thousands of lives, it is unsurprising that Moscow is reaching for increasingly fresher troops. Officially, the reservists were told that they were being sent to, quote, guard infrastructure. Media reports show, however, that this term is most likely a guise for secretive combat training, which will result in these reservists being sent to the front lines. This training is supposed to last 2 months. This new mobilization operation will most likely concern several different regions, as Russian military commissariats have reportedly set corresponding plans for each occupied administrative area. Since the unpopular partial mobilization of 2022, the Russian government has shifted to recruiting contract soldiers and has been luring men in through various financial incentives.
Volodymyr Zelensky says that Ukraine is currently working on a new prisoner exchange with Russia. The new initiative could see the return of as many as 1,200 Ukrainian soldiers from captivity.
Ukrainian authorities say that they are currently in touch with mediation partners such as Turkey or the UAE to help resume the process of prisoner exchanges. Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov says that as a result of these talks, the Istanbul agreements have been kicked off. These are a set of Turkish brokered deals from 2022, which spell out the conditions for organized prisoner of war exchanges between Russia and Ukraine. Since the start of the full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022, Ukrainian sources say that close to 6,000 Ukrainians have returned from captivity. This latest prisoner exchange could take place as soon as Christmas or the New Year.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.